Hello and welcome to Referendum TV. Today I'm joined by Alan Bissett, author, playwright and enfant terrible of Scottish theatre. Welcome, Alan. How you doing?
I'm alright, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, what have you been up to since the referendum result, mate?
In this order, grieving, picking myself back up and starting some new projects. I figured get back to work.
Well, let's just, we'll dodge about different stuff, but let's talk about what you're doing just now, because that seems intriguing.
Okay.
What is it?
Well, the first thing on the horizon is a new play, which is about Graham Souness, who is the former Rangers player-manager and Liverpool legend. I'm doing a play about his managerial career, in which I'm playing Graham Souness.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I never realised that.
Well, I've not grown the moustache yet, so...
Are you going to get the bubble pair?
Well, I was thinking about that, because I was in getting my hair cut the other week there, and I was telling my hairdresser that I was doing it, and he's like, "Oh mate, I've not given a guy a perm since the 80s. Go on, let me.
Is he quite an old guy, this guy?
Yes, and I'm thinking, I don't know. I'll go the moustache, because moustaches are easy to get rid of, but a perm not so much.
That sounds fantastic. What stage are you at with that?
Well, we did an extract of it at the Tron Theatre 2 nights ago. It was a scripted, in Glasgow. It was a scripted reading, so we did about maybe 35-40 minutes of it, just to test out the material. And there was an audience, so obviously we got some feedback at the end. But what was good was that the audience turned out to be mainly football fans.
Right.
Because myself and the director, Sasha Kyle, we've always said we wanted to do theatre for people who don't like theatre, or who think they don't like theatre. Who think that theatre's poncy and it's just for folk with English degrees. And then you sort of tempt them in with certain subject matter and give them amazing nights at theatre, and then they realise that they
engage with the process.
Exactly.
Because it's something they can identify with.
Exactly. So it was all Rangers fans that were in.
Right.
And the nature of the show is that I've written it in Shakespearean language.
No.
Because I wanted them to be that kind of figure,
Give me a wee line from that then, if you're going to use Shakespearean language. You don't
have to memorised.
You don't have to go. Well, just ad lib.
Right. Okay. Let me think. I'll see if I can remember. He does an opening monologue to the Ibrox dressing room,
right,
which is a sort of Shakespearean soliloquy. But let's see if I can remember some of it. I am Souness. I am simply the best. You may have heard me spoken of by smaller men in commentary boxes who still pretend to know the game. Broken alcoholics tipping gin. Women.
Fantastic.
I come to Ibrox from Sampdoria. Do you know how hard Italians are? Look at that scar, like a shark bite. I once captained the mighty Liverpool FC to European glory twice, while you were running up and down the Gullen Sands pretending to be men, languishing, fifth behind the Dundee United, Hearts, Celtic, Aberdeen, Hibs, etc.
Fantastic. I'll be on your applause.
I remember more of it than I thought there.
Absolutely. See, a wee bit of pressure, cameras off, pretend it's not there.
But it's better with a moustache.
And on you go when you enrol fully.
Exactly. And once I've spent
take your full height.
6 months in the gym.
Take your full height. Well, that was one of the big things before he had his heart attack, that he was very big on sit-ups and press-ups and what have you. He was incredibly fit, and then he had he's scared, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he was a very disciplined character in every way, and certainly one of the fittest players of that era.
Yeah.
And that's why he always came down hard on the younger players like McCoy and Durant, who were out on the pitch. He's like, you're not an athlete if you're good at bevying. Do you know Glasgow being what it is, obviously.
Do you know what he's doing now?
Well, he's a football pundit now. Which I think is his true calling, actually, because he's incredibly insightful, and he cuts right through it, and he's got a lot of disdain for the modern footballer, who I think he believes is over pampered and over protected. Footballers have got all the power, managers don't have the power, because Souness was very much about the chain of command. I think as far as a football pundit goes, he's hypnotic to watch,
Really? So you're really a big fan of him?
I'm not blind to his faults, but his faults are part of what make him such an interesting figure. But I would call myself
there's a nice balance here. And John Collins at Hibs, when he was manager, was a fitness fanatic too, but he did it to the nth degree, where he ended up shaming the younger players by doing more sit-ups than them.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I can see where he gets it from, and that's a similar era.
Yep.
When do you reckon you'll be good to go on that? When do you reckon?
I think we're probably going to have it ready to go by 2016 because it's a big production.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a long play. It's quite epic because we're treating it like a Shakespeare play, like one of his war plays, like Henry V or something like that. We wanted to have that sort of scope. So that'll take a while to get ready. So
as a Hibs fan, I declare my interest. I look forward to the battle scene
the
at Easter Road.
That's
Beastie McCluskey.
That's right. That's the opening scene. He does the big speech to the Ibrox dressing room, and then they go on to play Hibs,
and he gets sent off.
And that's the first battle, really. So yeah, and also 2016 will be 30 years since he joined Rangers.
86.
So 86. So we figured that gives it a bit of a marketing buzz.
Excellent. That sounds fantastic.
Yep.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Can we go? Can we go back to the immediate aftermath? Because it's 3 weeks today. The vote was had.
Is it?
It is.
Right. God, it feels like a lifetime now.
It does feel a long time ago. But imagine you were right in the centre of things. It must have felt like, because you had your play on at the festival.
Yeah.
You were active on Twitter. And you were sought as a commentator fairly regularly. You had scraps in social media with people like David Torrance, Ian Martin, Ian Smart, and others.
All the good guys.
Well, that's up to you to say that, obviously. So you're really right amongst it. How are you feeling now?
Well, still pretty dejected about it. I mean, I think everybody who threw their lot in with the Yes campaign is feeling wounded, but at the same time, people have picked themselves up fairly quickly, and it happened almost instantly. There was a grieving period. There was probably a 24-hour period of horrible confusion before people started saying, "Right, come on, let's get back in there."
Horrible confusion. Break that down for me.
Yeah, and I think everybody picked themselves up pretty quickly and realised that we'd only just started. It's a long game, and this was always going to be a sort of staging point. And even if we'd won, there was still going to be a whole negotiation period. The referendum was only ever going to be the start. That's what a lot of us were making clear. What I don't think we'd quite realise was, even if it was a no vote, that didn't mean it was all over. And nobody quite knows how it's going to go, what the future course of action is. But the momentum's still there, the energy's still there, the will is still there. And it's actually the Unionist side that's in disarray. Because I think what a lot of them are realising is that they've been played by the Tories. Now, we could see that a mile off. It was clearly a Tory trap. Labour were never in charge. Labour were only ever the puppets.
Do you think they were collectively deluded?
I think they were collectively deluded, but I think they were very willing to be deluded. I think for the likes of Labour and the Lib Dems, it was just win at all costs. I don't think they really had a strategy in place for dealing with the Tory power grab. But those of us on the yes side could see that a mile away. It was obvious.
So it was a Pyrrhic victory then for the Unionists?
It's a Pyrrhic victory for Labour, for sure. I can't see any way in which the Tories won't consolidate their power base out of it. In no way is it a Pyrrhic victory for them. It's an absolute victory for the Tories.
Because they put Labour into the long grass where they can't get out of.
Yeah. The Tories were puppeteering Labour all along. Could they but see it? Because the Tories are in power. And they are more ruthless than Labour. And they found a marriage of convenience. And now that it's no longer expedient for them to be allies with Labour, the veil has dropped, and it's like, right, okay, this is what it's about all along. It was always about a power grab for the Westminster Parliament.
This is Linton Crosby's idea, the Australian advisor to David Cameron, that he would destroy the Labour Party to a certain extent, and this has helped in that process, you think?
Yes.
Yeah, because now they have been sided with the Tories, they've seemed to have sided with the Tories, and they've seemed to have been the Tories, well, you call them puppets.
Yeah,
so that
spear carriers, however you want to put it.
So that means that in people's minds that association is built strongly.
Yeah, well, certainly in Scotland, I think Labour are finished, because if you look at it, they lost 40% of their vote. 40% of people who voted Labour voted yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a huge amount of people. That's 40% of people who voted Labour who've now seen right through them who didn't believe them, who don't trust them, and in places like Glasgow, Dundee, was it North Lanarkshire? Which should be Labour heartlands,
Yep.
yes, won. So that's terrible news for Labour. And I think the abiding memory will be them siding with the Tories to deny Scotland a full democracy. And that will be passed on from generation to generation. Everybody who voted yes will be telling their kids, never trust the Labour Party. I mean, we didn't have a reason to trust them before. In the aftermath of Blair and the Iraq War and the financial crash and the gap between rich and poor getting wider and all sorts of things.
Where does this leave the figureheads like Alistair Darling and latterly, as he came into it very strongly, Gordon Brown?
Well, they're a joke. I mean, they've won. They've set out to do a certain thing, which was win the referendum, and that's been achieved. But Brown's reputation was on a sugary peg anyway, and now forget it, because the vow, I will ensure the Scottish people have more power.
This is Alan doing mimicry here. He's very good at it. He's done Soonest and now he's doing Gordon Brown.
And actual the guy that played David Murray in my Graham Souness play, Ian Grieve, also played Gordon Brown on stage.
Right.
So there you go. Very, very fine actor. But the whole thing about that promise or vow or whatever you want to call it from Gordon Brown was that, first of all, it was a last minute panic. Mm-hmm. Secondly, he never had any authority. He never had any power to implement that. And that's what we were trying to say. This guy's not in government. He could tell us whatever he likes. He could tell us we're going to wake up tomorrow and the river's going to be flowing with chocolate milk. He's got no power to implement it, and that's now been exposed.
But if we put your directorial hat on, it was quite a piece of theatre with the young, attractive surgeon speaking to camera in the round, as he did a couple of days before the actual referendum.
Yeah, well, the whole thing with Gordon Brown and the Better Together campaign was about stage management. Because while we were out there filling town halls and village halls and church halls full of people from the community, Gordon Brown would come up and speak before a hand-picked audience. They wouldn't let just anybody in to a Gordon Brown talk because they feared uncomfortable questions.
Well,
they feared the hostile crowd. We had no fear of that.
Well, one of the uncomfortable questions or statements was the guy, I think it was up in Dundee, who shouted "Blue Tories" and then was escorted from
that
the
tells
premises.
you all you need to know.
Yeah.
It was always political theatre. So, the whole smoke and mirrors of the vows and the promises of more powers has been exposed and is being steadily more exposed. And you can only hope that, as, let's say, over the course of the next year, Scotland will either get nothing or it will get powers that actually are, that will put the SNP government in a weaker position because it will be forced to make difficult choices about tax raises or
it'll make them accountable
cuts.
without giving them the responsibility for revenue.
Yeah, responsibility without power. Yeah. And actually, if you look at their rhetoric, all along that's what they were talking about. They weren't talking about more power. Mm-hmm. They weren't talking about more money. They were talking about more responsibility and accountability, which are very loaded terms. And what they mean is, we're going to load you with bureaucracy. We're going to force you to make difficult decisions that will make you unpopular in front of the Scottish electorate. And we'll make sure that actually the real power goes to us.
Stays with us, yeah.
Not even stays with us, accumulates with us.
You think more would?
Well, it will, because the whole thing about making sure that Scottish MPs can't vote on English only matters is a power grab. Whatever way you want to look at it, that's less power for Scottish MPs. And cutting the Barnett formula, that means that power accumulates to Westminster, which it was always going to, because with a no vote, what you're doing is you're giving them the power permanently. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe the naivety of people who think that they would reward us for this. Why would they?
I'm not so sure it's about naivety. There's a couple of things I want to come on to because you work in the medium of theatre and in journalism, in writing, and above a certain level, writing's about influencing people.
Yes.
So you can see how it might have come about that these people might have been fed the wrong information or misinformation.
Yes.
Presumably, right. In the process, you became a figurehead.
Right.
Much the same way as the Reverend Stuart Campbell at Wings Over Scotland became a figurehead. And as a result of that, you started to get personally attacked.
Yeah.
During the campaign. How was that for you?
Well, at first, I quite enjoyed it because I was in it for the fight.
Right.
I felt pretty fired up. I believed, and still believe, that I was on the right side, that our side had the moral authority, had the better arguments, and that the mainstream media were essentially there to disseminate the no message. So I had no real respect for the people who were attacking me. So when it started to happen, I was a bit like, well, bring it on.
But
But
this is
then,
particularly
as it went on and became a kind of a campaign or a witch hunt, then it was a bit like, you pick up the paper and you're like, oh bloody, 3 weeks in, because you think, oh, that's it over now. They're going to get bored. They're going to move on because they've got bigger fish to fry.
To contextualise it, this is in part a reflection on the pure, the dead, and the brilliant. You're playing the Edinburgh Theatre Festival,
yeah.
but also you'd shown a part of that at the
That's
SNP
what started
conference.
it. Yeah.
Say more about that.
Well, what happened was we were preparing the show, The Pure, the Dead and the Brilliant, for the Edinburgh Fringe, and we were crowdfunding at that time, and the crowdfunding was going well, but we still needed that extra kick. So the Yes campaign said, well, would you like to do a slot at the SNP conference? Now, what I thought that meant was, obviously the main stage where Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon and Angus Robertson and people like that talk, and we'll give you a wee back hall, and you can perform it in front of 30 people.
Right.
And I thought, well, it'll be a good way to try out the material.
Uh-huh.
It'll be a good way to get people knowing about the play in the first place.
Yep.
And also some of these people might like to contribute funds to it.
Absolutely.
Because we got no funding from the official Yes campaign or for the SNP. It was Yes supporters. It was ordinary people like us, the people who voted Yes, that were funding it £5 a year, 10 or there, 20 quid a year. And I thought, well, a lot of those people will be at that conference. And we got there. It was the Aberdeen Conference Centre, and it was in the main hall. And we walked in and were like, you have got to be joking me. Audience of 1,500 people, which is enormous.
Right.
And so we took the stage and we performed one of the scenes, and the reaction was phenomenal. The noise, it was like a rock and roll gig.
For people who don't know about the play, it's about ghouls and
supernatural creatures.
Supernatural creatures.
Scottish mythological creatures who are debating the referendum and what their role in it is going to be, and they decide they want to influence it to try and get a no vote, because they're arguing that if Scotland becomes a real nation, nobody will believe in fairy stories anymore, right? So it's a fairly fun premise.
Right.
But that also allows me to sneak in a lot of stuff about politics. Because I'm writing about fairies, you can sneak in a lot of stuff and you don't have to be realistic.
Right.
So we did that, and it went from being a political conference to being like a Bruce Springsteen gig. The people were roaring, they were stamping, they were applauding, and there was one line especially. There's a character in it called Black Donald who's a demon, who is sort of your Britnat, really, right? And he's talking about how they will force a no vote, and he says, and the media will transmit our message, every single word, because we own them. And the whole hall just erupted and stamped. And of course, there's a whole layer of journalists from the UK media who were like, and I think that was the first time they realised just how much loathing there was out there among Scottish people for them.
It says something about your expertise, that you emotionally connect through your material so strongly with an audience, albeit a skewed audience. But nonetheless, connecting really powerfully.
Yeah, it did. I mean, that play did, but especially in that particular setting. And I think at that point they were like, right, your card's marked.
Right.
So essentially, I sort of dared them. And after that, I think a few of them got together and said, right, let's take him down. And it was just like doof, 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 doof. They were daring each other to go further and further and further.
The first one was David Torrance, wasn't it?
Yeah,
he was making the association
ethnic nationalism,
and he was using dictionary definitions and basically casting.
Aye, it was all very spurious. Because if you say ethnic nationalist to somebody, they think Milosevic. They think Hitler,
Arkan,
all this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? That's the association people have, which was deliberate on his part. He didn't come out and say Alan Bissett is a fascist. But when you start floating a term like ethnic nationalist, what you're saying is somebody who believes in bloodlines and racial purity and nonsense like that, that I would never even remotely associate myself with. And then to defend himself, he was like, well, I think you'll find the dictionary definition of ethnic is, you're like, well, the dictionary definition might be that.
It's more mimicry.
But you know what you're doing.
Yes.
So we had a wee back and forth about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think once that term had been out there in the public domain, that then became what the press used. Alan Bissett, ethnic nationalist. And they went further and further. So the composer James Macmillan then started using words like evil, started using words like fascism, Nazism. That then started to become part of the discourse. I'm watching this unfold and just going, you've got to be joking me.
The interesting thing with James Macmillan is he wrote a very good essay some time ago. I don't know if you remember it. It was, looking at the Reformation as year zero, a sort of Pol Pot type view. And I actually admired aspects of that. So I was kind of surprised when he latterly came out to try and, he made some denigrating comments about National Collective and then obviously yourself. So I was kind of surprised by that. What's your thoughts?
He's an idiot.
Right, okay.
He's an extreme character. He says things that are deliberately shocking.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't really have a very sound understanding of politics. And I think because he believed he was going to be on the side of the victors,
right,
which it turned out he was, that then gave him a licence to say whatever the hell he liked because the press had his back. So he's somebody I've got absolutely no time for at all. I mean, there are people who I argued with during the referendum campaign who I actually do have respect for. People like Duncan Hothersall, whose views I might not agree with, but they're cogent. I generally believe is on the side of social justice. He's no somebody who I have a particular antipathy for. The likes of David Torrance, I can read some of the things he says and says, I can see where he's coming from there. Alex Massey, these people are not idiots, but James Macmillan is.
Right. Okay. Well, that's an interesting perspective. I had Gerda Stevenson on here, also a playwright and actress and novelist, and there's quite a lot of things she does. I felt like it was the start of charades when I was going like that with her. In terms of the involvement in National Collective and that side of things, what do you think the legacy of that's going to be?
There's National Collective as an organisation, and then there's the sort of cultural movement for Scottish independence, which aren't exactly the same thing, but National Collective certainly acted as a lightning rod, and brought a lot of artists together, and gave a lot of coherence, and created excitement. They were colourful, they were young, they were enthusiastic, energetic, they were getting things done. But I think in a broader sense, the fact that most of the artists in Scotland, and not all of them, but most of them came out for independence and were using their art, their words, their energies, their passions to try and bring that about, I think is incredibly exciting. And that won't go away, because what will happen is we'll go from campaigning for independence to sort of reflecting on what we've lived through.
Yeah.
Because we're not in a campaigning mode at the moment. At the moment we're regrouping and recuperating and sort of sharing ideas about where to go next.
So that'll be channelled into the work?
Yes, I think so.
So that'll manifest in lots of different ways in the coming years.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it does seem a defining moment for the generation, but when you talk about young people in National Collective, I'm sitting here 10 years older than you thinking, okay, that's interesting. It's an interesting idea is what young people are. But in terms of you, is this your first involvement in politics?
No. I've been involved in socialist groups in the past. Because for me it was always about class, it was never really about nation. And it seemed apparent to me that if we were going to try and create social justice, if we're going to try and strengthen the working class right across the UK, I would add, then that meant completely rearranging the structure. Because there's so much power consolidated
in London
that we have to weaken it, and Scottish independence was the best way of weakening it.
So if we just flip back to the Soonest play for a second, because I'm thinking of the standard complaint of socialist unionists would be, the Docker in Liverpool has as much in common with the Docker in Glasgow,
and
rather than the Laird in the Highlands and the Docker in Glasgow. And tying it back to that in terms of the great working class city of Liverpool and the support for their football team in Souness and Rangers in the shipyards and what have you, how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, that's true.
Right.
So you accept that basic premise that working class people have more in common with each other in whatever country in the world than they do with their own aristocracy. But what I would say in response is, okay, right, so what's the plan? Well, we fight together. How? What solidarity? So what's the plan? What do we do next? Because we've tried everything. We've tried voting Labour. We've tried voting Lib Dem. We've tried changing the electoral system. That failed. We've tried strikes. And that doesn't work because Thatcher has smashed the trade union movement, and people won't go out and strike for any longer than a day because who's going to pay their mortgage? We've tried demonstrating in the street. 1 million people marched against the Iraq war, didn't make any difference whatsoever. They went ahead and did it anyway. So what's the plan?
So yours is a practical expedient.
Yeah, exactly. If I genuinely thought there was a way of improving the conditions of working class people in Britain, I wouldn't be in favour of Scottish independence. But independence seemed to me a way of completely destabilising what had become a very ossified and centralised power structure. And it seemed obvious to me that a no vote would consolidate it. And a no vote has consolidated it.
What do you think of the complaint from James McMillan, that some artists were frightened to say no? Do you think that has any relevance or weight?
No, I don't. Let's even take that at face value and let's say that that's true, right? So if you're an artist who's afraid to come out and say no, that you're in favour of a no vote, right? First of all, you're expressing the majority opinion. So why would you be? It's not like this is some tiny extreme fringe view that you would be expressing that you're going to get jumped on for. The entire media would have supported you in it. Secondly, why would you not have the courage of your convictions? Because if you have a political opinion, you express it, you listen to the counter argument. If you can't defend your argument against theirs, there's a problem with your argument. And thirdly, what kind of artist is that afraid? That suggests to me that you're not a very good artist. Because the whole point of being an artist is to take risks and to be courageous and to push the envelope. And if what you're saying is, I've got a political opinion, but I'm too afraid to express it, it's a bit like, well, you're in the wrong industry.
I think it was interesting because it was edging towards, the Nazis had a exhibition of decadent art, and it was edging towards the suggestion that the Yes artists were sort of somehow producing conservative nationalist art, and those that weren't were being excluded. So it was kind of flipping things on its head.
Well, that might hold water if they'd actually produced any art.
Right.
I mean, where was the art that was expressing the no view of the world? It didn't exist. I think Eddie Maguire did one suite, a classical suite called the Unity Suite that had a couple of performances, and fair enough, you know what I mean? That's fine. I mean, Eddie's a unionist, and he's obviously creating art that he.
And you have respect for that position.
Well, I have respect for the fact that he's prepared to stand up for his position. I don't agree with his position.
Oh, absolutely.
But I debated with Eddie a few times on TV, and I admired the fact that he was prepared to stand up and say, "This is my political position," and that he would listen to what my counter argument was and come back with his argument. And that we shook hands at the end of it and went away. I've got complete respect for Eddie Maguire in that respect, and people like Denise Minor and Damien Barr, people who did eventually come out for the no argument. I respected the fact that they were doing it. So this idea that there was artists who were sort of hiding away because they were afraid that Yes artists would disagree with them, it's like, well, first of all, I think that was a cover for the fact that the No campaign didn't have the same levels of cultural support that the Yes campaign did. So they came out with this idea that, well, there's all these no voting artists, but they're just too afraid to come out with it. But even if it was true, it's a bit like, well, how can you respect those people?
Do you, again, from an artistic point of view, you as director and creator of shows and as an author, do you admire the technical ability of the spin doctors in the No campaign for producing the fear the way they did?
Well, as it happens, one of those spin doctors is a friend of mine, a guy called Rob Shorthouse, who I was at university with.
That was at Stirling?
At Stirling, aye, a good mate of mine. We worked in theatre together. He directed shows and I produced them, and we were in the cast together. And he's a guy who got things done, and he was very ambitious, and I admired him. So, in a strange way, is at the level of being a mate with him, I'm proud of him that he's done well for himself. I just wish he wasn't on that side.
But in terms, what I'm thinking about is the movie Wag the Dog with Dustin Hoffman, where he creates the script to give them the story they need to obscure the real story in the background, and is effectively shot afterwards. I don't want to give the story away, but that's what happens with them afterwards. In terms of how they brought the fear in the last 2 weeks particularly, they did particularly well in that.
Well, yeah, they did the job that they were hired to do, but I don't admire the job that they were hired to do.
No.
I don't think necessarily these are people with political integrity.
Right, but do you think that's possible when you're in PR?
If you are in the position of having to make right-wing policy palatable to the public, then no.
Right. Okay. It's an interesting point of view. I've spoken with Professor Robertson, the guy who produced the information on the BBC bias, and the research on the BBC bias, and he was fairly of the opinion that the last 2 weeks were critical in terms of bringing home the vote for the No campaign through the various organs, but particularly the BBC and the various scare stories that were being put out there. One of the things I really enjoyed, I had Bruce Fumi in here. So slight tangent.
I did a gig with him recently.
Well, you did a gig with him, and you ordered wine for the audience.
I did,
and the next day he was here.
Oh, right. Oh, I see. Wee hangover.
A wee hangover. He was well, yes.
Yeah.
Bruce was, he was kind of, I'm a bit bleary-eyed, he said. And then we chatted, and
I bought 8 bottles of wine and said to the audience, I was like, right, get stuck in.
That's a nice move. Sorry, I've lost my thread a little bit there, but let me just come back. How was that for you? This is aftermath stuff, isn't it? Or no, was it just before?
No, that particular gig was after the referendum.
That's right,
and it was one of the first public gigs I've had to do since the vote, and I wasn't really up for it. It was just, I was still demoralised. But I recognised that most of the audience coming along were probably Yes supporters, and that there was probably more value in us just all sitting around having a drink and talking about how we felt than doing an actual gig. And every so often I would stand up and read something. And then Bruce would stand up and do a bit of stand-up.
Just randomly?
Yeah.
It's funny, the sequence of events, that was the Thursday. So that was a Wednesday night you were doing it, or Tuesday, and it was Wednesday night, and that was the Thursday he was in here. And then on the Friday, he got the Scottish Comedian of the Year award.
Oh, right,
and
right.
I think they're directly linked.
I'll take all credit for that.
You can have all credit. I think it's.
You can thank me later, Bruce.
I think it's a great story. Well, we hope to organise something with Bruce going forward in terms in terms of our launch night. Let's go back to the pure, the dead, and the brilliant for a wee second. You were also involved in let's all go back to Bowies as well, weren't you?
Well, as a guest. I mean, I wasn't part of the organisational committee, but I turned up and I did a couple of. They asked me to talk about football, and they asked me to talk about Braveheart.
Braveheart.
Well, they had the whole thing about All Back to Bowies was they had a different topic for discussion every day.
Right.
Something vaguely independence themed.
Right.
So they decided, let's talk about Braveheart. So they had me and various other people, Fiona Watson, the historian, who else was in the panel? God, I can't remember. There was a few of us anyway, and the whole panel hated Braveheart, and I was the only person who liked it. I fucking love Braveheart. I can come out and say that now that the referendum's done, because if you said that before the referendum, people were like, "Oh, you're only voting yes because you like Braveheart. It's because you've seen a film." Nonsense. But as it happens, I do love Braveheart.
Can we be clear? Your partner is English, isn't she?
She's half English. Her mother's English.
But you from Yorkshire?
No, my ex is from Yorkshire.
Right, me too. Must be a Yorkshire Scottish.
And I'm
thing.
a quarter English. My gran was English. She was from Lincolnshire.
Right, so I mean, you can kind of blow that out of the water fairly rapidly as an allegation.
Well, I feel that I can, and you feel that I can, but
yeah,
that might not hold any water if you're a rabid unionist.
a rabid unionist.
Yeah.
So
Some unionists are rabid.
Say more.
Well, I mean, for a lot of them, it's just like the union must never die. I mean, there's a lot of no voters who voted no for what they think were the right reasons, or because their fears had been amplified by the media. They thought there was too much risk, and okay, that's unfortunate, but you can sort of understand it in a way. But there's also a lot of no voters who were just like, I'm voting no because I'm British. But what about, no, I'm British. But do you think that, no, I'm British? And that's it. And there was literally nothing you could say.
And they would stick their chin out like that and get quite confrontational.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not that our side never did things like that.
No.
But for a lot of them, it was absolutely 100% about identity.
I suppose coming on...
And they accused us of being the ones who were obsessed with identity and who were obsessed with nationhood and these abstract things. And my experience is that the vast majority of people in the Yes movement, they believed this was the best way to bring about social justice. But for a lot of people in the No campaign, it was simply about identity and nothing else. And they used all the other stuff as a smokescreen for that basic fact. Because once you'd cut through all their arguments, they would just say, well, at the end of the day, I'm British and I don't want that to change.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, well, whoopee-doo, great.
See, just to come back to you in the intellectual wing of the movement, if you like, the Yes movement, what did you think of the love bomb of 213 celebrities, intellectuals?
Well, I mean, I was personally gutted about it because David Gilmour from Pink Floyd was one of those celebrities. And I remember when Bowie came out, you're like, oh no, Bowie, don't. I mean, we all love Bowie.
Right.
And you're like, right, okay, you're now an impediment.
I'm with Bowie, okay, just to be clear.
Right, well, I mean, he's a genius.
Right, okay.
And the unfortunate thing about Bowie, the reason why the Bowie thing pissed so many people off is, first of all, we loved him. And secondly, because he's never made a political stand about anything in his entire career. All the terrible right-wing governments that the UK has had, he never had a word to say about Thatcher, never a word to say about Iraq, he's never had a word to say about poverty. But the idea of Scotland wanting to make its own decisions, suddenly he's rushing to the barricades.
But his mum was Scottish.
Was she? Well,
yeah.
I don't know if that makes that much difference.
Well, it might have been an idea of his identity that was at stake, so that's why it came out. But you're saying there was an inconsistency in that.
Well, it's certainly interesting that this was the one political statement that he's been prepared to make for his entire career, this particular issue. Whereas there were other times where we could have used his voice and he didn't give it. But the idea of Scotland wanting to make its own political decisions means he simply must speak out. So I thought, right, okay, well that certainly says a great deal. Well, I mean, even that, the intermediary of Kate Moss, it wasn't even like he prepared I mean, J.K. Rowling at least wrote an essay explaining her position. I didn't agree with that. I think she went too far sometimes in some of the things she said.
Oh, with the Death Eaters?
Yeah, come on. And there's people who want to chase me back over the border for this. It's like, talk about dangling bait, you know. She knew that a lot of people would react to that, so she can retrospectively say, see?
I think there was some in it that I was genuinely disappointed by as well. Mary Beard, I was kind of broken-hearted. Me and my friend, we were big fans of Mary Beard. I don't know why, we agreed to really like her, three different things she's done. And we actually had a dialogue with her, albeit on Twitter, and we tried to get her onto a Referendum TV during the festival. But others, like Starkey and Simon Shamma, Dan Snow and various others, weren't particularly surprised by.
No, not really. I mean, their establishment. But I mean, there were a lot of people who came out in a very positive way for us and got it. You know, Billy Bragg got it.
Billy Bragg really got it.
He really did, aye. And who were some of the other ones towards the end? Noel Gallagher came out for Yes. Not in a massive way. I just said, well, if I was Scottish, I'd be voting for independence.
Morrissey.
A wee bit. I can't remember if Morrissey did or not.
Arthur Scargill certainly did it.
Yeah, I think Catboy did a bit of work in him there.
Right.
And so
we hope to have Cat on.
There were some who could see what we were trying to do.
Right.
And I was really grateful to them for that, for seeing through the smokescreen. And it was obvious to them that it was actually about weakening the British establishment and finding cracks and gaps for socialism to emerge. That was Billy Bragg's point. But for the rest of them, it was simply about maintaining Britain at all costs. And that's what I mean about identity. You can have these intellects, and you can have these people who can be quite dispassionate about history or about the political situation in other countries. But when it comes to Britain, it's like the Union must be maintained at all costs. And you're like, right, okay, what's this really about? This is ideology.
This is dog whistle stuff. This is stuff that lies in abeyance whilst they're pursuing other pursuits, and then all of a sudden it's brought to the fore and becomes absolutely imperative for them.
Yeah. And if you want to actually look at what the United Kingdom is, it's not a country. It's a union of 4 countries. It's a 300-year-old union that was made for the political expediency of the ruling class at the time. That's all. It's a bit of paper. So I don't see why that can't be undone, which is not to say it could be undone without any bother whatsoever. But the idea that Britain has to be maintained at all costs, I don't get it. If it's clearly not working, which it's no, or rather it is working, it's just working for a tiny amount of very rich people. If it's not working for the majority of the population, why are we persisting with this fiction that it has to be maintained?
I suppose because the associations bite deep and transcend other stuff that happens in their life, the temporary economic situation.
Yeah, but what are these associations?
Well, I would imagine all the history of the Union, the history of the Union Jack, for example, the history of the British Armed Forces. There's a lot of emotional...
But that is a history of imperialism.
Sure, I know, but I think there's a history of emotional attachment to that.
Well, there certainly is, because you can only rule with consent, and consent, as Chomsky has told us, has to be, to a certain extent, manufactured. And I think the British propaganda system is very sophisticated. They've managed to make a lot of people believe that Britain represents fairness and justice and democracy, despite all the evidence against that, despite the fact that the British state has been complicit in torture, despite the fact that the British state has been responsible for overturning democracy along with the United States in foreign countries all over the globe, despite the fact that we have wandered into other countries and killed innocent civilians. You know, oh well, that's a temporary aberration. It's like, no, that is the history of the British state.
Well, I suppose one of the questions is often asked about Britishness is what makes you proud to be British, and one of the things that came up regularly was the BBC. And 2 of the myths that have been dispelled for me, and I wonder if it's the same for you, I'm checking out with you, one of the myths that's been dispelled is that economically we could not do things by ourselves, we can. And secondly, that the BBC was neutral. What's your view on that?
Well, the BBC is not neutral. No, I mean, you can see that actually during times of war. In the run-up to the Iraq War, you know, there would be certain dissenting voices allowed in.
Yeah.
But especially once war has commenced, it's a propaganda role. And that was the case here, that they let in just enough dissenting voices to make it seem as though they were neutral. But the way that they framed the debate, the way that they personalised the debate in terms of making it seem as though it was all about Alex Salmond, the way they allowed the No campaign to set the terms of the debate, because it was always the Yes campaign on the back foot. It would be warning about independence, and then they would invite the Yes campaign on to respond to that warning about independence.
You've said they about 8 times now in the past 2.5 minutes, okay? Who's they?
Well, the BBC.
Who?
Well, I mean, I don't have specific names.
No, but where does it
reside? It's an establishment mentality that runs through it. I mean, includes in the name,
right.
The British Broadcasting Corporation.
So it's part of the ethos?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think to a certain extent maybe that bias is unconscious. But they're not there to make sure that so many voices that are challenging the establishment get through, that the establishment itself, which they're a part of, becomes fatally weakened. You know, that's never going to be allowed. The BBC presented the No campaign to the public under the pretense of neutrality, but essentially what they were doing was allowing them to set the terms of the debate. That seems obvious now, and I think one of the interesting effects of the referendum campaign is that for a lot of people in Scotland now, the whole structure has been exposed, because the way that the political class the financial class and the media class all just slid into each other and cooperated to push down this Scottish democratic movement that was rising up.
Yeah.
It was two forces like that. What the way they like to discuss it is that it's two forces going like that and meeting in the middle, two equal and opposite forces. That this side has a case and this side has a case. Let's discuss. Whereas actually it was like this. You had the establishment pressing down the way, and you had the people pressing up the way, because our discourse was taking place in social media, in pubs, in village halls, in living rooms, among people. And their discourse was basically confined to the media. And I think they'd pretty much admit that now, that they wanted to win the war in the air.
Yeah, because
we were winning the war on the ground, and they won the war in the air.
Yeah.
And they bombed us with propaganda, and the media were absolutely central to that.
I had a friend we mentioned.
I don't know why it surprises us. It's just how it works.
Well, because it became visible for the first time, as
Yeah.
you said, it was laid bare for the first time. I have a friend who had visited Vietnam, and he said when I was there, he said the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, always thought we'd win. So this, this sounds like, at this stage it seems, they have a temporary victory, but they've not defeated the Yes campaign.
I would say that's true, and I think they're probably surprised that we're still going, and that we still have as much energy as we do, because, there's some very, very interesting responses to the no vote from the no side. Now, I was interviewed on the BBC, as it happens, for a documentary called How the Campaign Was Won, and they interviewed us before the vote.
Right.
And they said, talk as though Yes has won, why did Yes win? Talk as though Yes has lost, why did Yes lose, right? And so there was essentially two different interviews. And I watched the show, and they interviewed Ruth Davidson and Willie Rennie after the vote, as it happens. And they said, how did you feel when you realised that you'd won? And Ruth Davidson, in a rare moment of honesty, said that all she felt was relief. She'd expected to feel euphoria, but she didn't. She felt relief. And Willie Rennie said the same. And actually most of the no campaigners I've encountered have said the same. All they felt was relief. It's over. Now, we would have felt euphoria. We would have felt joy. Why didn't they? They'd been campaigning for this for 3 years. Why didn't they feel the most utter euphoria about that victory? Because they know, deep down, they know they're on the wrong side.
And they never really won it.
Well, they did win it.
It was the media that won it for them. Is that what we're saying?
I think they know all these things.
All right, okay.
And I think that for a lot of no voters, there was a great deal of embarrassment about their vote. They didn't. The no voters, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, they're like, why do we have to talk about this? I'm sick of hearing about this. Shut the debate down, because they were either a bit embarrassed about their own voting intention, or they didn't want to have to defend their ideas. Now, both of those things are revealing, because Yes campaigners, it's all they wanted to talk about it. They wanted to talk about it all the time because they believed they were on the right side, and they believed in the strength of their ideas. And there weren't any parties. There weren't any street parties celebrating a no victory. The one very visible one that took place was in George Square, and it was people giving Nazi salutes and burning saltires. Now, I don't think that represents your average no voter.
No.
But it's interesting that that was the only public celebration. Now, if Yes had won, there would have been street parties, and every town up and down the land would still be celebrating now. George Square would still be bedecked with saltires. So what does that mean, that no didn't celebrate?
Well, we can come on to that. Just in terms of the actual referendum campaign, you have an eye to talent, you have an eye to celebrity and to star performers. We were, in your eyes, the star performers.
During the campaign?
Yeah.
Oh God, there was so many. Well, I think...
A veritable galaxy of stars.
Yeah, well, I think you can pick out some of the campaigning groups.
You can't see yourself by
Alan
Bissett.
As some of the campaigning groups like Women for Independence, Labour for Independence, National Collective. I think they played a very important role and still are. But in terms of individuals, I think Cat Boyd was somebody who, I don't know if you know Cat Boyd, trade unionist.
Yeah, we hope to have her on. She couldn't manage this week, but hopefully next week.
Yeah, she gave absolutely everything to it. She's young, dynamic, a lot of energy, a lot of sound political knowledge. Caroline Leckie.
Yeah.
people like Kate Higgins, people like Jean Freeman. A lot of the Women for Independence people really impressed me.
Jean Freeman's takedown of Alex Neil was a
joy
to
phenomenal.
behold.
She's absolutely phenomenal. She has such strength and security in her position. I think in a lot of ways the women really outperformed the men because they were cooler. You know, what the times that I saw the women being interviewed, especially the women involved with Women for Independence, they have a sort of antipathy to that adversarial type of politics that maybe tends to be more male and aggressive, and they simply sat back and let the arguments speak and cut right through. Now, Bonnie Greer, I don't know if you know Bonnie Greer.
I'm a great admirer of Bonnie Greer.
Yeah, obviously not a campaigner for Women for Independence, but there was a fantastic moment when she was on Sky News. I don't know if you've seen the clip, and she exposes the whole thing. She basically it shames the media live on television and says, "Look, you're basically rigging this. You're showing one side of the argument," and you can see the microchip just explode in the host's brain. As he's like, you know, in his ear, people are like, shut her down, and very calmly and in a non-aggressive way, but firmly cuts right through their argument. And I found a lot of the women involved in Women for Independence were able to do that. But
Bonnie Greer was a hero of mine for sitting next to Nick Griffin and not punching him. I thought I thought that was remarkable.
She's great, and she was brilliant to have her. She's another example of somebody who got it. You know, she got it. Chomsky got it. Tariq Ali got it.
Chomsky got it. This is, you know, touching the hem of the garment. This is such a wee claim to fame. When Professor Robertson was here, he had actually been in email contact with Chomsky, and Chomsky had expressed reservations about the word nationalism.
Right.
So, so much so that Professor Robertson took time to explain the nature of what was happening here.
Right.
And thereafter, in part, Chomsky then came out to say that he was broadly in favour.
Yeah.
So that's a wee side
and
story.
I think had the campaign run any longer, would have got more of these figures coming out. People were actually. I think the nationalism thing put a lot of people off. But for me, I mean, I don't even really understand what people mean by that word, because it's clear what the opposition mean by it, which is scary monsters. But there are people in the independence movement who it was clear to me were nationalists, but I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are arguing for the right of the Scottish nation to be autonomous, then in one respect you're obviously a nationalist. But the arguments that were being put forward, and I was involved in the Yes campaign for 3 years, were ones about social justice. They were about democracy. They were about anti-imperialism. They were about anti-nuclear weapons. They were left-wing socialist arguments, which I think is why I was so comfortable as part of that movement, and why a lot of people on the left were so comfortable as part of that movement, and why the artists were so comfortable as part of that movement, because it wasn't really about nationalism. They were about nationalism. Exactly. They were absolutely about the British state had to 100% be the unit of organisation of the working class. That was a left-wing argument. We cannot break up the British state because it must, by necessity, be the unit of organisation of the working class. Why? I don't know.
But some of them were really struggling with that. Owen Jones.
Who I love.
I do too.
Yeah.
I'm enthused by him, but I think he was really struggling. And
he was.
Noticeably when he was on with Tommy, Tommy was basically saying, look, we pretty much agree on everything else. The only thing we don't agree with is where the geographic boundary is set in terms of authority. I think that's essentially what it comes down to.
Owen was disappointing in the independence debate. In every other respect, I absolutely love him. I mean, I think he's vital. And he's given the left an enormous amount of energy.
I'm aware of the time. I want to just bring it back to pace it, future orient it, because I want to get back to the soonest play. We'll leave the referendum just now. That battle will continue. It's not over by a long way. Let's come back to that because it sounds really exciting. Are you going to fit in any political themes in that as well?
Yes, but you have to that has to be the underlay rather than the shag pile. You can't really avoid it if you're writing about Rangers,
right? Because
Rangers are to a certain extent a political organisation,
right?
And that became clear sometimes during the referendum, which is not to say that every Rangers supporter voted no, because I think a lot of them voted yes. Otherwise, Glasgow would never have voted yes.
Yeah.
but the most visible element of the Rangers support, I think, was staunchly no, because they have ties to Britishness and that kind of thing. So these things will come out, but also because the story spans Glasgow and Liverpool. You know, it's also a story about class.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so this stuff will be there.
What other things might be on the horizon for you in the future, do you think?
Well, I'm talking to the novelist Sarah Sheridan about doing a documentary about the Yes campaign,
Right.
for international film festivals.
Fantastic.
And that's still the early stages of discussion, but we want to show, because what will happen is the international community will go, oh, it was a no, right, that's that. But we have to expose the means by which it became a no, and the various levels of manipulation that took place.
And whilst the British state's eye is off the situation,
Yeah, we can get busy.
you can get busy in the background and
Yep.
building information.
And also a novel. I want to write a novel which is about, to some extent, the aftermath of the referendum.
I suppose to a certain extent we're lucky to have found time in your diary to get you along here today.
Yeah, but you know, I've always got time for people who want to talk to me for an hour.
That sounds very good, and it sounds an appropriate place to bring the show to a close today. I've been joined today by Alan Bissett on the couch. It's been a fantastic tour of the referendum, and we hope to have him back at some point in the future. Alan Bissett, thank you very much.
No worries. Aye, cheers.
Thank you very much, and we'll be back soon.